not only for our board, but for everybody. So if every one of our board members has their second shot or is fully vaccinated, when do we get back to business as usual without social distancing?
Thank you, Jeff.
I would think that it's when everybody's had their second shot and is either 10 days or 2 weeks past their second shot.
Right. 2 weeks.
I would defer to Jeff Joyner on that answer.
Yeah, once you're 2 weeks past your second shot, you're fully vaccinated, unless you have the J&J, then you only have one shot.
But 2 weeks post-shot, you should be not able to carry it or get it. So I would see, I'd like to think there's some new guidelines coming out shortly, or they could just trust us to have an IQ over 100 and be able to figure out what our risk is.
Mm-hmm.
My sarcasm.
I thought those guidelines are already out, quite frankly.
They haven't been updated. I think if we were all as a board fully vaccinated, there would be no reason for us not to. I mean, we'd still want to take, precautions as possible, but we should be fine meeting as a board. I mean, even over the top, if we all had to wear a mask, it's still, that would be then some, but, I think we would be fine.
Well, I'll have to check with the state on how to proceed with that, because in theory, then, if we have a board meeting in our offices, the public has a right to attend. And at this point, I don't know how we would exclude them.
So let me ask you this question, being an independent thinker, can we have a board meeting that is Zoomed? So board members that can't make it or don't feel like coming could still, in the public could all attend?
I think so. I think that would be the appropriate way to handle it.
Universe, right?
Well, we have to live stream our board meetings anyway, correct?
Correct. Yes.
So technically, you can attend. Anybody can attend wherever they are. You could be in Florida and attend the board meeting.
I don't think we don't have. Do we have to? I'm sorry. This was a year ago. I don't know that we have to live stream. I think we just have to record them and post them. Right?
Oh, okay.
Jody, can you remind me? We only did that for 2 months before we went into pandemic mode.
I think they have to be live screened, but then they have to be posted within 5 days on our website.
Well, we're using that technology now, so it seems like we can incorporate it with an in-house meeting. How's breakfast, Patricia?
Looks delicious.
Mid-bite.
You have any extra?
We should check over a 1 year time period and see how many people actually go on the website and actually watch a full meeting. That'll tell you that.
But you can't see if they watch the whole thing, but you can see views. And I think the one that has like the most, I think, is like 9 views. And it's probably me going back and doing minutes and stuff on it.
I'm guessing it's a regulation
that
turns out to be relatively pointless over time, despite the expense required to adhere to it.
Are we past 8 o'clock?
We are. So
we're not going to do the board. We'll just go into audit and finance.
All right, let me quickly explain the board meeting for the rest of the board members. We had requested from the city of Oneonta a copy of their secret review, because that needs to be incorporated in our review for the Corning project. The city clerk is on vacation until Monday, and nobody else apparently can get us a copy of it. So since we don't have that, we did not have a resolution prepared to approve the Corning project, and that's just going to be postponed another 2 weeks until our regular board meeting.
Great.
All right, so I guess we go to you, Jeff.
Yeah. So welcome to the Audit and Finance Committee meeting. First, like to start with the minutes of March 11th. You've all been provided a copy of those minutes and just like to look for a motion for approval of those minutes unless there's any conversation, questions, changes, etc. Anybody have any commentary?
I'll make the motion, Dave Raleigh.
Thank you, Dave. Do I have a second?
Tom?
Tom, thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or discussion? No. Thank you. Then we have a series of financial reports that have been provided. The budget. And hopefully you've all looked at that. We got the budget, we got the March balance sheet, comparative year over year, the March income statement, and I did have a few just items to discuss on the budget. I would just suggest that an addition be made to the line item within the rental category that currently says Hale Trucking as the rental company to slash Hale and Burr, because I know it'll represent a piece of both for 2021. Also in the budget, the 2,221 budget, that was humor. It's labeled that way. So also in that budget, you'll notice that there was an adjustment made for insurance. That was a significant uptick in insurance, and that is as a result of us picking up the property insurance for Ioxis. That's what I was talking with Megan about earlier this morning. And I don't know if anyone has any other commentary, Jody, if you want to make any comments with respect to that, but we'll be picking up the building insurance apparently.
At least for this coming year, yes.
And that starts when, Jody? Just
their lease was renewed April 1st, so it goes from April 1st to March 31st. It actually started last year after the company was sold.
okay.
Okay, so that's I just point that out because it's a significant $12,700 annualized as a significant change. Also, unless anyone else has any questions on the budget items, or Jody, if you have any comments on that, I'd move to the balance sheet. Okay, I did ask, and Megan's going to check into it. There's a balance on the accrued interest receivable line item within the balance sheet that was identical from 2020 to 2021, which is highly unlikely because of the change in balances and interest accruals, et cetera. So just going to check into that. And I was also just going to ask, and I apologize if I'm, I should know this, but the unearned revenue account at $35,000 that sits on the balance sheet. Can you refresh my memory what that is?
I'm sorry, Jeff. Can you repeat the question?
Yes, the unearned revenue that shows up on the balance sheet. So it's about $35,000.
I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay. Now that's something that that's a curiosity. I just wondered if you could just if you can send out just when you find out what that is.
Yep, I'll do that, and I'll do the interest for you.
Yeah, and then there's a due to others that shows a penny. So I think it's a little silly to show it as a penny, but
Okay.
On the March income statement, significant change grants and economic development expense, $32,000. If you could take a look, if you know what that item, why such a significant change in the expense category for the month? Do you know what that is, Jody?
What's it under, Jeff?
Grants and economic development expense.
Is that related to Richfield Springs?
That may be the PPE. I file that under grants.
Ah,
And since we didn't have a lot before, and then I got rid of most of that money in March when I went back and paid everybody out the extra 500, I'm going to assume that that's that because I file it under grants.
That makes
Gotcha.
sense to
Okay.
me based on the amount.
yeah, that was between 20. Was that between 25 and 30? How much was that?
I just closed it. 20. I said 24.
24. Okay. Right. Okay.
24.18.
I got you.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the last thing, apologize because I'm milking the utilities account through March of this year with respect to the comparison to March of last year is up 3 times.
That would probably be because we covered the Hale building and Hale was covering it themselves. So between August to mid-February, well, yeah, they just took over the bill. I just paid the last bill at the end of February. So we were covering the Hale building's utilities, electric and gas.
Okay, which would have been late last year, not in the first quarter, and bleeding over into the first quarter this year.
Yeah, it would have started in not August because we left it off, so it would have started in like November, December.
Gotcha. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Yep.
Does anybody else have any comments or questions with respect to the financials? Okay. How about the loan report? Not a lot of activity there. Any questions? Okay, then we have the expenses, the checks. Oh, go ahead. Was somebody going to ask something?
No, I'm fine.
Okay, then we had checks to be paid, which pretty much you can see within the chart that the outliers are the audit that was prepared for us.
Right.
Mostert, Manzanero, and Scott, $8,000, and then the large liability insurance premium. The rest are should be relatively familiar to us on an operating basis. Any questions on that?
My only question is, Delgado has taken over the Chambers spot, correct?
In theory, they signed the lease, but they have not actually physically moved into that space yet.
Okay, so are they paying rent?
So I think we actually haven't received rent from them for the last 2 months. So I reached out to Amanda. Well, I actually told her about it 2 months ago, and we didn't get anything. And so I reached out to her last week and told her that I still hadn't gotten anything. So she emailed me on Monday and told me that it comes from the government, doesn't come from their office. So she told me that it should be in there yesterday, and I checked all day yesterday. It wasn't there. So I sent her an email yesterday afternoon, and I haven't heard back from her. So, I mean, I'm not sure.
Is that the modern day that checks in the mail?
Well, they wire it, so.
I knew that.
So therefore, we understand the delay if it's a wire. Okay. Just kidding. So what was the effective date of the lease?
I believe it started March 1st.
So they legally and technically owe us for March and April.
Correct. They actually owe us for January because they were February because they were still in a lease with us, the old lease.
Right.
So, and they would just owe us the new amount starting March 1st. So
Gotcha. Well, stay on them and keep us up to date.
will do.
Okay, any comments, questions with respect to any of the financial reports? No? If not, I'd look for a motion to approve them. I think I saw Tom wave his hand, so that's a motion.
I'll second. Dave Rowley.
Second, Dave. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. And I think, with the exception of, there's one other item on unfinished business. It's the Burr truck insurance that we need to discuss. So I'll turn that over to Megan and Jody.
Bird Trucking has put insurance on our building for roughly $800,000. Our insurance that we had coverage on it was $1.66 million. So it's about half the amount. However, when you look at what the appraisal that we had done on the building, it appraised a couple of years ago at $725,000. So the question to the board is, do you want to go back and have him double the insurance on it, even though if we sold the building to him, it would only be $700,000? Or should we just allow him to insure it for $800,000?
Jody, the major difference there, if I read correctly, and as your logic would tell you, is that the insurance company wants you to insure it for replacement cost. You go in there and have to construct the building. What are today's costs to replace it, right?
That's correct. It's about $200,000. Well, roughly $100 a square foot is what they're estimating. So for 20,000 square foot building, it'd be about $2 million.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about the rest, but I'm fine with covering the 800,000 is fine, and because if something happened to that building and you had to completely demolish it, and you got $800,000, you'd still have the land, and it's more than what it appraises for. So I'm okay with that.
That would be my recommendation as well.
Yeah, I'm okay with that too. I don't think we need to ask Burr to insure it for something more than it's worth. Now, if we want to carry the difference, that's up to us, but I think Burr is fine where they're at.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
Okay, it sounds like most folks on the call agree. Great.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. And I think that concludes our audit and finance meeting. So motion, I don't know if we need a motion to adjourn or just to slide over to the projects.
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
Have a second? Josh, thank you. All those in favor? We're gone. Great. I don't see Cheryl's. Who is?
That would be me.
Tom.
Okay.
We'll start off with reviewing the minutes from our last meeting. Any comments, corrections, or requests for approval?
I'll make a motion.
To approve.
All
I'll
right.
second Jeff's motion.
Thank you, guys. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. I have some notes from Chairman Robinson, not surprisingly, about priorities for this meeting. Jody, you going to review the marketing proposal?
Yes, that's on the bottom of the agenda.
Okay. And she also requested Richfield Springs update. Do we have one for this morning?
Yes, that's also under unfinished business.
Okay. And so we're looking for your recommendations, man. That you're going to take that over at the end of this? We have nothing else. Anything else? Updates for us, Jody, on specials projects?
The things I kind of wanted to point out on the director's report, really briefly, is that we spent a tremendous amount of time on the Paris reports this month. That's why there's so few meetings on reviewing. We're also in the process of making corrections back from 2016 with the authority's budget office. And particularly, they want confirmation of all of the bond payments that were made by our bond clients. So we're reaching out to them to get bank certification emails from them, clarifying exactly what was paid on all the bonds and how much was drawn down. That's taken up quite a bit of our time in the office right now.
Hey, Jody,
Yeah.
just out of curiosity, is this as a result of an audit at the state level, or why are they reaching back 5 years now and asking for this information?
I actually initiated it, because when you go through all of our records, like one of the bonds back in 2016 was entered wrong. They had the wrong amount. And so when you tie it to the current year of what is actually, the numbers just won't add up. So we reached out to them and asked them if they could make certain corrections for us. We've come to an agreement on everything, except that they would just like confirmation on the bond payments themselves, just for the open bonds, not for anything that was closed out, so that all the numbers, when we finally do the final corrections on all of the, I think there's 8 or 9 bonds that we have outstanding, when all of those are done, it's done. We don't have to go back in the past anymore. But we actually initiated it with them, asking their help, because I can't go back to 2016 and correct a number. Their system just won't let us change historical records. So we went back to them and asked them if they could make those changes for us.
So are you getting reasonable response from the banks that hold the bonds in terms of getting you the research?
We just reached out to them. They requested that information last Thursday or Friday, the authority's budget office. So I think Megan's reaching out to our bond clients, I think yesterday. So it's a little early to tell. And the state understands that it's going to take us some time to get that information back to them. They're not demanding that we collect it in the next week.
Great. Thank you, Jody. Appreciate it.
Yep. There is one issue that is on the report, which is a new professional housing. The owner of Twin Mountain Top Construction is looking to purchase the former school at 290 Chestnut Street. And I met with them, I guess, 2 days ago. Our chairman asked that I meet with them. It also included the Chamber of Commerce, NBT Bank, and City Councilman Len Carlson, who were all at that meeting. This is a big issue for our agency, because what they're arguing is that they need a pilot in order to make the project work. We very seldom do housing pilots. And what they're claiming is that this would be open. This would not be student housing. This would be professional, for professional workers. They're looking to convert that school into about a 10-unit apartment. And ultimately, they have plans to build 3 more units on that property. And they're claiming that without a pilot, the numbers just won't work for them if it went to full tax rolls. I'm not sure. And certainly we looked at doing one for Springbrook with the apartments on the Ford complex. We would have to more than likely revise our policy on our pilot programs to look at, are we going to continue? Because there is definitely a need for market-driven housing as opposed to just student housing. But it's going to be, I'm sure we're going to open up a can of worms to other people who says, well, I want to buy a building and renovate it and lease it out, whether it's a 1-story or 1 family or a 2-family house. So I don't know what the board's view is on this. And that's why I'm discussing it with you guys now.
How does that project differ from the student housing above the Suco campus?
I don't know how the board, I wasn't on here when that project was done, so I'm not sure how the board viewed that project.
I
Well,
guess,
There was a pilot on that project, wasn't there? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
There was.
yes.
Yep.
Now,
There was. So I don't think the restriction regarding housing applied.
Well, I would add though that it was an operating business model that was going to hire people to
Right.
manage the desk, have maintenance, have cleaning, whatever the services were that they were providing. It was an operating business that was going to create employment. It was not an investment for real estate investors to make a profit.
okay, so get your arrows ready and you can all skewer me. It costs an awful lot to invest in a development and get a return in New York State with the cost of everything, including the regulations you need to satisfy. Really, a pilot for any business is to ease the expense the first 10 or 15 or 20 years until you get up to speed and up to running. We're never going to have housing development in this county that people can afford to build and other people can afford to buy and finance, especially Johnny Lunch Bucket, if we don't look at this creatively as a way to get it done. It probably needs to be limits on how small it is and what other ramifications we might have. But I would be looking at it creatively about how could we, that's me, how can we make it work? Because I do think that industry is a hard one. Josh can probably tell us, to make a lot of money, to build a development and make it work. You got to pack them in 10 feet apart or something like that because of the cost of doing it. And really the cost of doing anything in New York is what restricts us from a lot of growth upstate. If we can do something as an IDA to make that a little bit easier to do, I think we have to look at that creatively.
It also sounds like this is from what Jody says, this is an ongoing project that if they successfully renovate that existing building, which by the way, was more or less abandoned for sale by the school district because they didn't think that they could use it for district offices and meet the regulations, for the code regulation, which is kind of interesting that we're still looking at renovating the same basic structure, steel structure, et cetera. What are we 40 years down the road now or something like that, and putting people in it. So that's an interesting thought. But if they're going to add other units, then the pilot issue there is going to crop up again. It sounds like. And is there any discussion with that project, Jody, about job creation, maintenance, grounds, et cetera?
There was some discussion on that. He's going to get back to me with numbers as to how many people they would employ for maintenance and for groundkeeping. Because it is a large piece of property. They want to maintain the appearance of it.
It also, at the end of the day, is some taxable property in the city of Oneonta, which the city is hard pressed to find more of.
For the meeting host, enter your PIN followed by a pound.
Wasn't that property owned by, was that an individual that owned that? Didn't somebody live in that property or were they leasing it? Wasn't that?
Somebody is living in the property. I believe they lease it. Right now there's like one apartment in it.
Oh, okay.
I believe it's owned by a non-for-profit organization because it's going to take like 6 months for the sale to go through because they have.
Well, look, I think, thanks. Yeah, I remember that now, but I think we have to, as a broader stroke, and everybody's comments are, are very meaningful. You got to think about this long term. I know our bank, and we have financed many projects where individuals have purchased and renovated and put in multi-unit housing. They've done it without a pilot program, and they've been successful in generating NOI. And it's been good enough to pay their debt and make a nice profit. And now, I'm not saying that's the case in every case, but if you open up this type of thing, why would any developer not be running in here looking for a pilot program on every project when, even in fact, you know how human nature is, even if they can make the project work without it?
right. So
we have to consider that.
this is an out of ignorance question. the current pilot programs are all based on job creation. Is that correct? Is that like the main criteria?
That's correct.
Okay, which is why just an apartment building hasn't qualified in the past, because it provides housing. I mean, it's a good thing for the county, but it does not create any jobs.
Except
And
Suco.
there are other counties, like in the city of Ithaca, their IDA there, they have a policy to do housing. The city of Binghamton IDA does housing. They do pilots for housing, but they have a special policy for that. We have not incorporated any changes into our policy to accommodate housing. So this would be a big change.
Yeah,
I'd like to live long enough to see some out of control development in the region. It might be fun to watch. Too many houses got built. I don't know. Maybe more people would live here and solve some of our other economic problems. You know, there's a lot of loose ends, and I agree with Jeff. There's a lot of things, you know, unintended consequences and things we have to look at. But I still think there's not a great return on real estate investment in upstate New York. In Oneonta, New York. You know, we're Johnny Lunchbucket territory. Not a lot of money here.
I think we need to do more due diligence on this. I mean, I would agree with Jeff. I have 3 buildings in Cooperstown, 15 units total. You know, I didn't build the buildings, but you know, probably $100,000, $150,000 worth of investment in renovating those buildings between the 3 of them over the last 10 years. And you know, I mean our housing stock, especially multi-units, is in rough shape. You know, so any multi-unit building, and I'm speaking from experience in Cooperstown. I've looked at a number of them. Any of them, looking at a significant investment in just bringing them up to, you know, reasonable, decent housing. You know, my occupancy rate is almost 0. You know, most of my tenants are Bassett employees. You know, I mean, I'm not against a pilot, but I'd like to see what those other counties have in terms of Broome, Tompkins, you know, or the city of Ithaca, the city of Binghamton, like that. To me, it'd be easier to have a policy in front of us than to look at the specific project. Because I want to remove the project from it. I want to remove the people from it. I want to look at it from a policy perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
But
and
it's still a conversation.
And the flexibility, you know, if you're looking at it from a policy perspective, you know, it could be anything that we want it to be. It could be a reduced pilot program. It could be, it could have a mixed use component, which I suspect some of these markets you're going to see, you know, if there's retail on the upper floor and a bunch of residences above, you're going to see, yes, that qualifies for a pilot. But again, researching it and getting much more due diligence is the right way to go at this moment, I think.
I agree with that, and I'd love to see those other policies, Jody, just to take a quick look at them. The other thing I'd like to see, though, I'd like to see a little bit more information about the scope of this project. That's a sizable structure, and the investment in converting that. We're not talking, you know, we may be talking $1 million, $1.5 million. I'm thinking to create apartments in that building. So we're not talking about a small housing project that might be significant. I'd just like to know that information. But I think we're on the right track when we're talking about policy here versus an individual project. But we may end up with a policy that says it has to be a project of, you know, $500,000 or something before it could be considered. But I'd love to see those other policies.
Okay.
See, the question, you know, you start getting into the semantics about a project, you know, and,
Right.
and just in additional detail, I've had 2 investors that talked to me about this project, totally detached from any assistance, been through some budget. You know, think about an $800,000 note that has to be serviced by 10 units that creates $1,400 or $1,500 a month.
Right.
Is that doable to cover the expenses and cash flow? Yeah, it's doable. You have to have equity. You have to have skin in the game. We want to be very careful in throwing, you know, our money at a project that, you know, if we're not in with just the taxes, it doesn't work. That doesn't make sense.
Right.
Because they have a hiccup, they have something that's a problem, and they have no working capital to keep it afloat. I mean, those are all things you have to think about. That's all.
Right.
All right, so at this point in time, I will pull together some other counties of how what their policies are with respect to housing, and we'll bring it back to the board.
Great.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Full disclosure, I'm involved in not that project in Oneonta, but a different project that is very similar. So if we get into policies and stuff, I don't know at what point in time I have a conflict of interest. So I'll just kind of keep you updated.
The moment you walk in with the project and say, hey, we think we would like that. But it's still worthy, great conversation. It's still worthy looking at it and maybe perhaps developing a separate policy.
Mhm.
I think it's also a major plus that we actually have an interest in taking that property right in the middle of Chestnut Street and making something viable out of it would be great.
Okay, Jody, next on your recap, you have marketing proposal. What else? What do you got next on your sheet?
Okay, we might as well jump right into Richfield Springs right now.
Okay.
On Richfield Springs, Cheryl at the last board meeting asked for recommendations as to how we could fund Richfield Springs. So I had sent out to the projects committee and then to the full board, they were sent out yesterday, 6 different options of financing. This assumes that on option 1 was that between the county, the village, and the town, if they were to upfront monies, total $325,000, that we could repay them in 2022. It also includes that Andela would pay for 2 of the lots at about $363,000, and the IDA funding would be about $511,000, which is about 21% of the total project cost. Option 2 that we listed was assuming that the town and the village says we're not going to upfront any monies, that we could approach the county for $325,000 to be repaid next year with the ESD grant that we'd be reimbursed for. It also looked at the possibility, again, with Andela purchasing the property, if she was to commit again to the job creation that she was proposing, in theory, we could get a $135,000 community development block grant. And then the IDA and the CRC would each contribute about $188,000, which would be about 15% of the total project cost. Option 3 was basically the same, but to remove the natural gas component. Now, the reason that we could remove the natural gas component was we had built into the original construction numbers extending natural gas to the site and paying for it with the EDA funding. However, when we got the original estimate from New York State Electric and Gas, they assumed that New York State Electric and Gas would upfront the monies to put the gas line in, and that the users would ultimately pay it off as part of their monthly gas bill. So that would be another option, which would reduce the total amount for the IDA to about $141,000 and the CRC down to $141,000. Option 4, which is option 4 and 5.
Jody, I'm sorry, just so I understand, that option of removing the gas is just the upfront cost, that it would still be in place, and that the payback would occur over time, but we wouldn't have to fund it as part of the project cost.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Option 4 and 5 is assuming that Andela Products does not commit. Now, she did have discussions with Key Bank last week on April 1st. They did a Zoom meeting. They are not in a position yet to say that they would fund the project. They're looking at, she's indicated that they reviewed it favorably, but obviously haven't gone into any great detail on the financial analysis yet. They were looking to drop the project down to about a $5 million project. The big issue with her is that she doesn't think that she could commit to any funding until she has bank financing, which wouldn't be really in place until next year. And she's claiming that, you know, how could she go out and buy property if there's no water and sewer to it? So that option 4 and 5 is now assuming that there is no Andela products and we're just going to fund this ourselves. In this particular case, option 4 would be that each of our agencies would have to put up $390,000. And while we could probably afford to do that, it's extremely, it extremely limits our financial safeguards. Option 5 is again without any county assistance, that we would have to come up with roughly $550,000 for each agency, which is basically funding 100% or 50% of the total project cost. There is an option 6, which is we could go back to the state and ask for another $155,000. Empire State Development can award construction grants of up to 20% of a total project cost. They did not award that to us when we originally applied for this project. They awarded us less than that. So if we did get the full 20%, it would increase our grant amount by another $155,000. And then on the bottom of the page, it shows what Otsego Now's contribution would be. Obviously, option 3 would be the best at 5.7%. What this entails is that we will definitely have to, if we want to go after additional funding, we would need our state senator's support to talk to ESD about that. As well as we probably should talk to Congressman Delgado about the time extension for the EDA grant. So those are our various options right now. I would recommend that we talk to our state senator and see if he can have a dialogue with ESD. Since the state is in the process of getting its recovery funds, there will be additional funding from the ESD that could increase the cost of this project or increase the grants, as well as talking to Congressman Delgado about getting us a start date extension. So I know that's a lot to digest. We don't have to make a decision today, but we would like to move forward with having those dialogues.
Let me just ask a question, because we've been on this merry-go-round for a long time. Why is it in April that we're being told that couldn't get a bank commitment until 2022? Is that correct? Is that what I'm hearing?
That's what you're hearing.
It makes no sense. Jeff Lord, am I crazy or?
No, well, no, you're not. But let me throw some color in.
Okay.
First of all, we got to keep this in perspective, and I think we talked about this in a meeting before. This business we've had as a potential project for 15 or 20 years. I mean, we talked about it, it comes in, it goes out, it comes in, it goes out. So that's just some backdrop. Could it be reasonable that it would take until 2022 to get a commitment? Think about where they were. How did 19 end? When will they have 2020 financial statements completed by their accountant? When will they be provided so that the bank can make an analysis of that year and then year-to-date progress in 2021 on the heels of COVID and how that affected the business? You have implications of whether they had to shut down and re-up and analyzing what they did before and during. Some businesses did very well during COVID because although they were interrupted, we literally have seen some businesses with record years. Others literally shut down and suffered significantly. And how do you weigh that into historic performance? That's a difficult analysis to make and how they're going to do going forward.
Right.
So that could be affecting them. Now, if I had a business that I've had 5, 6, 8 years of performance, I've got a lot of analytics to look at, and I know COVID affected them 1 year. It's not as difficult to analyze what's going on. And to issue a term sheet, which is different than a commitment, but to issue a term sheet that says, here's the terms and conditions under which I'm willing to finance the project, is not that big a deal. So,
Right. The other thing,
I don't know where they're at. I don't know, why they're pushing this back. I suspect we could get there and they could push us back again because that's been the history and the pattern.
yeah, the other thing KeyBank is talking about is they're looking to do a 504 loan guarantee. So that will take probably 3 to 4 months to get approved.
Which tells you, again, they want to push their guarantee on the loan as high as 75 to 90%. So.
That's correct, and that is not a very comfortable feeling right now.
Well, it's great. I mean, it's a great tool. If they can get the financing, it's a great tool. But by the way, you made a comment earlier, Jody, that said somebody's trying to push the project to $5 million. Who was trying to push it to 5?
Well, what it was that Andela a year and a half ago estimated that the project was going to cost about $11 to $12 million. At one point in time, she was looking at like an $18 million project. What she gave to the bank was the original estimate that she used for the CFA grant application that she had submitted, which was down to $5 million, because 20% of that is roughly $1 million. So she's looking at going back to the original proposal that she had, which was a $5 million project, and not her big grandiose scale, which I think that KeyBank indicated that based on the preliminaries that they've looked at, that was not out of the question to provide financing for a $5 to $6 million project.
So in lieu of this information, you're suggesting, Jody, that we go back, try to extend the start date, see if we can also gain additional funding with the idea that, as Jeff is saying, this has been going on for a long time. We could be in the same position in 6 months or 9 months. So let's look at it potentially an option that does not include $363,000 purchase. Correct?
That's correct.
I would add to that you probably want to go and find out what the conditions that you have to meet to get the $155,000 are. Do you have to have a committed project in there? Or will they commit it without that project in there, and timing and conditions, all of that has to be taken into consideration, I would suspect.
For the extra $155,000, that could be done at the regional level. It could amend a grant application to increase the amount by that amount. The application that we submitted was for an infrastructure project. It was not tied to job creation. So that even if Andela does not go ahead, that grant is still available to provide funding for the infrastructure improvements. What we would need.
Jody,
Yeah.
so is there a timing component of this? Why do I understand that we really want to see what the cost differential is if we were to move ahead with the project without Andela versus with Andela. We want to understand that. But that doesn't mean we have to do something prior to getting a decision on Andela, correct? Meaning, aren't we better off if we figure out if Andela is really going in there and that they do have the 363 in before we pull the trigger on anything that we're going to do? We just have to set an internal deadline for that.
I did have discussions with her yesterday, day before yesterday, about if she would provide a commitment letter to purchasing the property if we extended the water, sewer, and natural gas. And she was going to check with her advisors to see, she thought that that was a reasonable request.
So I came in kind of in the middle of this project, or on the tail end if it's been going on for that many years. I have a couple quick questions just so I understand things. Who currently owns the property? Does the IDA?
Yes.
And we're looking to do a $2.4 million improvement there. And if I'm reading this correctly, 1.2 has been funded with the federal share, and the state is funding 325.
That's correct.
And so somehow we have to come up with 875, right? Like somebody has to come up with the other 800 something thousand to finish out the project, right?
That's correct, except the 325, unlike the $1.2 million, which we can draw down as we do construction, the 325 from the state will not be available until the project is complete. So in theory, we have to come up with the $1.2 million, not just the 875.
Okay.
Reimbursable 325.
Right.
It seems like, you know, if you're looking at a project and you've got half of it funded from free sources, if it's not a slam dunk, then it seems like there may be some other issue we're missing. Does that make sense? You know, if we're looking to do an infrastructure project and it doesn't add $2.4 million of value, then we may be missing some part of the bigger picture. Because if we've got half of the funding in place, then this should, you know, whether Andela is involved or not, this should be a straightforward project. And if it's not a straightforward project at some point in time, then is it not marketable to other tenants? So I guess it just seems like we've got a huge portion of the infrastructure paid for. It's almost as if Andela isn't really part of the equation. They may be somebody that is interested in renting the property or purchasing the property in the future. If there are only, you know, possible tenant, then this project, I may be missing something. It doesn't seem to make sense. If we've got that much money, and it's not in a sense a home run, then
isn't it, Josh? You know, I just throw out, you know, this from just take the names off of it. Just take everything else off of it. What you're talking about is there an adequate ROI, right?
correct.
So if we put the money in and we get this money to fund it, does it make sense because there's going to be return on that investment? If you go that route, I mean, when we started this project, there are hundreds of thousands of dollars that have been spent on the acquisition of this ground, that were spent on the archaeological work, that were spent on there's an artifact Indian ruin that limited the number of developable acres. We spent, I don't know, $700,000-800,000 to get here. Now we're talking about spending another, if we did pull the full boat here, $780,000, or there's no ROI in this. If you really took a look at the IDA, the question is, forget Andela, what's the market appeal of this project with utilities, with gas, which was a big component of this? I think Tom brought up, this is not much gas anywhere else, but it has gas.
Right.
Is there a market for it? That's the overriding question.
Correct.
That's better said than I said it. I think that's kind of what I'm getting at is there an ROI on this property with 1.2 million in federal funding? If there isn't, with that much funding, then I feel like we need to look at it again.
That's why it makes all kinds of sense to have a paired up project as you're moving forward. It would just make a lot of sense if you had one to go in, because if you're just taking another flyer, then we'll have another lot to develop or lots to develop with gas. We've got lots to develop that are developed here in Oneonta. We don't have people banging our door down to build on.
You also don't have a supply of gas.
Right, that's where I started.
Well, I see Larry is still here. Do you want to weigh in on whether you think in your town there is potential clients for this site?
Good morning, everybody. How are you?
Hi, Larry.
been watching the meeting, and it's been pretty interesting. I got to agree with what Josh is looking at it. I feel that this site should be a nice addition to the portfolio, even without Andela products in it. It's got in its final form, it's got the energy, it's got the utilities that these businesses are looking for. You know, we desperately need jobs in Richfield. We have a school that would be willing to flex to provide whatever kind of education I think that an employer needs. There aren't a lot of people dying at our borders to come into New York State, but there are a substantial number of people that are doing business here in New York State. With what we're seeing go on in Oneida County with the CRE project, that's bound to generate some nicely sized smaller businesses just for proximity to something that's happening there that a lot of people have put a lot of money and effort into. Herkimer County is show that you can build a shovel-ready site and people will come to it when it's right and when it's marketed. I'm out of my league marketing to out-of-state companies, but that's where I think the IDA's expertise comes in. I think an out-of-state or a downstate or a western state company that's looking to be closer to Utica probably checks with the Otsego IDA. Our carrying costs on owning property in Otsego County and in Richfield in particular are pretty reasonable relative to everywhere else. You know, the tax structure in Otsego and the town of Richfield is very attractive versus what you're going to pay if you build in a New Hartford or a Clinton or a Whitesboro or Utica. I'd like to see this project move forward with or without Andela as a tenant.
My concern, if there's a way to move forward without bankrupting the IDA, you know, if you don't do that, the other choice is you have a prospect and now it'll take 5 years or 3 years to get utilities to the edge of the property. So not really competing in my mind, because time is money for everybody. So this would get the property actually ready to go. You know, and I don't know what the marketability it is. I don't know what the odds are of closing it, but Larry's got some insight on things happening down in the Mohawk Valley, you know, and they're close enough to siphon off a little bit, hopefully. You know, I don't believe in scarcity. I believe there's abundance and there's always opportunity. So I'm not, you know, I try to be cautious because I know if I have to watch for that, but you know, it's got to be a market for this. And it's the best site we have for an actual legitimate industrial piece of property in Otsego County with all the utilities you need to be successful. Whether we can do it right now, that's all financial, and that's all got to be weighed and make a wise, studied decision.
It would be.
And to that point, Tom, all the stakeholders, 3 stakeholders, should be looking at their resources and how they can kick into this project.
I don't disagree with that.
It would be a shame to lose all of this funding and let it go to another area. From my perspective, obviously, I'm looking at this as a pretty large boost to the town of Richfield. The town, as I've said before, we're not a particularly wealthy community, and this would be it would just be a shame for us to lose the opportunity to leverage this kind of money.
It seems to me that there's no downside to talking with Senator Overacker and no downside to talking with Congressman Delgado at this particular point in time. See, the time extension would probably be helpful, correct, Jody?
That's correct.
Yes. I think that makes sense to me. And then based on the answers coming back from them, we have another discussion.
Yes. All right. So I will proceed along that course. The other thing that's still in the back of that we haven't factored in is that we will be receiving a large one-time fee from Corning when we do the Corning project. And then hopefully this year we'll also be doing Brooks Brooks bottling expansion, which is actually a larger number. So those revenues haven't been brought into this discussion yet. but in theory, we would be receiving revenues from those as well. But I will reach out to our senator and our congressman tomorrow.
Great.
You?
Marketing. We did have a discussion with Chris last week before he went on vacation. Seems like everybody's on vacation this week. He submitted a proposal for roughly $50,000. There's a little add-on for another $3,500 to continue our marketing campaign. What the changes that we would be looking at doing is actually splitting the marketing campaign and putting an equal emphasis on recruiting businesses. Right now, we've been just really focusing primarily on getting Otsego Now and Otsego County out to the greater metropolitan area of New York. And we've really been, I think, targeting just second homeowners or people to leave New York and to move up here. We discussed with Chris, and he's in agreement that we could target roughly 50% of the funds directly to the types of businesses we want to relocate up here. Those primarily being the companies that we discussed in electronics, life sciences, things along that nature. We also discussed actually targeting it to a more concrete, maybe a 6-month intensive budget, as opposed to spreading it out over an entire year. We did get, and I think we sent copies from the capital district, adjust changes from the New York City boroughs to the capital counties. And you can see that between April, July, and there was a heavy movement from people outside New York City and New York City moving up to the capital district. Once you got to October, it really dropped down again. So we were focusing maybe let's really concentrate on a 6-month period, really, as opposed to spreading out that $50,000 over a 12-month period and really concentrating it and getting a bigger bang for our buck that way. So that's what we're recommending. I'm recommending that we keep continuing it for 1 more year this year. We have had, I don't know, Megan, maybe you can give us some of the numbers. I think it was 60,000 hits on our webpage, on our landing pages. So people are looking at them. It becomes more difficult to determine how many of those people are actually moving up here because of those ads, but the word is getting out and people are looking at Otsego County. How the Capital District did their study was they actually did a Freedom of Information request to the U.S. Postal Service. And it took them 3 or 4 months to get the right language. They submitted, we talked to the Capital District Regional Planning Department. They gave us the language for how we could also foil the U.S. Postal Service to get an idea of how many people are possibly moving up from the greater metropolitan area to our county. So if you guys want us, we'll follow up with that. But there does seem to be a movement of people outside New York, moving outside New York to upstate.
I might suggest we include, well, Delaware County and where they move to, because it's, just across the river from where we are. So, if you just limit to Otsego, you won't be getting an actual picture of what the impact is on our retail markets and job markets.
Yeah, we have a Southern Tier East Regional Board meeting tomorrow, and I suggested to their director that the Southern Tier, which includes Delaware County, actually undertake this study with the U.S. Postal Service to get an idea of how many people are coming up for each of the counties. Also frees up our time so we don't have to mess with it. Southern Tier to do it.
Good idea.
I think an intensive 6 months is a good idea because I think personally that as vaccination percentages go up, Broadway reopens, restaurants reopen, I think you're going to see a slowdown of exodus out of the New York metropolitan area. So I think this particular time of year with the weather is a really good time to do an intensive campaign.
My only suggestion might be 3 months as opposed to 6 months, because in 6 months from now, it's October, and anybody who was going to move already did. You know, the good thing with digital, they could turn it on in the morning and vote the activity. But, you know, somebody who's not going to read it in September and move, you know, usually the moves you're getting ready to move, and after school gets out or whatever, they're moving in the summertime. So I'm not sure the last 2 months or whatever of that 6 months gets us as much return. But you could talk to Chris about that.
Okay, so we'll follow up when we get back next week.
Couple questions here.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Jody, can you hear me? Okay, couple questions. Out of the 60,000 hits on our page, has anybody contacted our office, or where are they directed to contact so that we know somebody's reached out to us?
So they do have a, I think I mentioned this before, they have a, like a little message center where they can input their name, they input their email address, and then they write, well, they can click whether they're interested in personal or business. And then that sends an email to both me and to PaperKite, and then I follow up with them. And so I have followed up with all of them. Many of them don't write back to me, and I think me and PaperKite actually talked about this at one of our last meetings, is that, you know, that maybe that's a little too personal. Like, you kind of just fill something out and then you get an email from me like, how can I help you? And it's like, I don't know, and they don't want to email me back. I have gotten some really weird emails back too. Someone wanted me to write a purchase agreement.
How many of those contacts have you gotten, Megan?
Yeah.
How many of those have you gotten?
It's kind of slowed down in the last few months. I would say now we're probably down to like 3 or 4 a week. It picked up. It kind of drops off, and then it'll pick up again. I think it depends on targeting. Obviously, I don't see those on my Facebook. You wouldn't see them on yours. So it depends on who's on Facebook and who's on YouTube. And then they fill it out, and it comes to me. So it really depends on the week. I think I've got 5 this week.
The one thing that I would suggest we consider here, since I'm doing a lot of marketing and doing a lot of digital marketing and trying to track the behavior of humanoids in the region, and currently the consumer seems to find things of interest and then back out and do their own research to decide what they want to do. They don't feel the need to do any engagement until they decide they want to do something. So 20 years ago, when you get a lead and have some interaction because you had the information, currently they don't need you. They just, you know, if you pique their interest and they're looking, they'll look up everything about Otsego County or the region that they want to find. When they find something they're finally interested, they'll pursue that. And I know for my business, I don't know until they call or walk in the door a lot of times, and they've been interacting with us digitally and wanting to be anonymous at that until they're ready to do something. So it's really difficult to measure. You know, to me, if you poked in at an activity, if we can get this change of address thing, get some measure of what's happening, you know, it won't be, you know, scientific, that's for sure. It's hard to track it.
Right, and obviously the post office FOIL, that's not going to tell us, you know, who, if someone moved, if it related directly back to our campaign.
Only tell us that someone moved.
Right. So Chris's idea is that now we have all these email addresses, and we're obviously, you know, people have already got the idea of Otsego County. So now if we create, not necessarily a newsletter, because people, I mean, I get newsletters in my email all the time. I don't read them. But if we create something small so that they see it and we continue to be in their consciousness. So like he had an idea of doing every month we do like a small blip on someone who's moved to the area from New York City and why they love it here. Very small, right to their email, so that it's just, you know, it was in their conscious before, and now it's back in their conscious again. I mean, you know, we're not selling something small, we're selling the idea of moving. So, you know, as he said before, they're not going to see it and just pack all their stuff and come here. So just keeping up with that is kind of his goal in this, and I assume it's ours as well.
I would say that, you know, they say half of advertising is wasted. You don't know which half. I don't agree with that. Half of it is top of the mind awareness advertising. You're telling the world you're here.
Right.
You know, I watch Syracuse basketball and I see New York Central Mutual is sponsored by. You know, they're not expecting to sell any policies based on their support of SU, but they're going to say, oh, I know them. You're in my index. So when I look for a car, or you might see it and say, oh, I'm with them. They're good people. You know, it's reinforcement of who we are. So we can get some more people to be aware that Otsego County exists. we get on their list. They know who we are. You're not going to get a lot more than that. Once again, I said in the beginning, you're soliciting 8 million people and trying to find, 20 that actually relocate with a business. So it's a very, the odds return on, to measure it, it's really difficult to make a science out of it. But I think if raising awareness that Otsego County exists and what's available here, with having 8 million possible matches, we ought to be able to find half a dozen or a dozen people who think it's a good idea.
If you don't do anything, nothing happens. So our
Absolutely.
job is to do something. I don't know whether Chris or this company is the right one for it, but if we don't continue to do something, that's to be debated going forward. But if we don't do anything, then we have nothing. And we've pretty much done nothing, and we have nothing. So we got to start somewhere. And what Tom said is 100%. And I don't believe the adage of the old days of if you email too much, they're going to unsubscribe. Listen, I get stuff all the time. People aren't even unsubscribing anymore. They're just clicking. They're just deleting. But
Yep.
Things catch me over time. They catch you. So that's the past. You have to pound them continuously, right, Tom? What you do continuously, and let them make the decision. Let them make the decision whether they want to get off it. And then this is what it is. But if you don't pound them, the next guy is. So it's just the way it is. So everybody wants to be ahead. Okay. And I'm at a place where there's a gazillion people right now doing a gazillion. Businesses are going up everywhere, and everybody says they're running out of water down here. Well, for some reason they keep building, regardless of whether there's water or not water. So it's
True.
People
Absolutely.
are building, whether we have gas or don't have gas, or we can talk about it. Let them make that decision. Doesn't matter. We keep working in behind the scenes, but it doesn't matter. It's not for us to decide whether we think we have gas. We just tell them what we have and let them decide.
Correct.
It's a moot point. All it does is bring out the wackos, for something that none of us know anything about, to be honest with you. So it's just destroyed our area because of the wackos. And we just got to keep moving forward and trying to attract somebody, anybody, 1, 2, 50, whatever it is. Okay.
One other, while we're on this topic, Jody, can you give us a recap of, as close as you can, the jobs created through your activities last year? I know we talk about custom electronics around 50, but I think it would be a good thing for us to be tracking on an annualized basis. One of the measures of how well we're doing is how many jobs we've added. I mean, we can't control business contraction and people leaving and everything else, but if you're doing a good job, and I know we're adding jobs, but I think it would be good for us and for your conversation with the county and everyone else to keep track of how many jobs we've added, because I know we have made a difference, and be good to measure it.
All right, I will put that together. I actually did that last month. I just don't have the numbers on me right now. But related to that, I did put in my monthly report that I had a meeting with Dr. Stevens, who's a professor of business administration at Hartwick. He originally came to see me about the creation of an entrepreneurial center. When he met with me and we gave him a tour of our offices, showed him where CAID was, showed him where the Small Business Development Center, he really focused then on not so much the entrepreneurial center, because he says we're actually doing that to a certain degree, but was impressed with what work we've been doing with the electronics industry, particularly custom electronics, Be Terrific, the flexible design studio, the company that just moved from Massachusetts, Ioxis. And so he would like, and we're having a meeting tomorrow again with custom electronics to talk about actually doing a collaboration between all of the industries on doing innovative approaches to attracting businesses in that cluster. So we'll be following up with that tomorrow, but that's another form of how we're trying to increase our marketing efforts. And Dr. Stevens wants to take a lead role with Hartwick in helping us with this.
Great.
Very good.
Come on, Jeff. You can get to a great, can't you, Jeff? Jeff, you're only very good. Can you get to a great for me? You're no fun.
That's the top of my scale, is very good.
Spoken like an accountant. Jody, what else do we have?
That's it. So I will follow up, and we will talk to Chris about continuing the campaign, shrinking it down into a concerted effort, maybe 6 months. We will also follow up with Richfield Springs tomorrow and trying to get our senator and congressman up to speed on where we are and how we need their help.
All right. Anything else for good of the group?
Could I add, if you have not sent me your evaluation of Jody's evaluation, I need it ASAP. Okay? We're going to have to move ahead, and Jeff and I meet with Jody, and so I would prefer to have your input before I do that.
All right. You move to
So,
close? Anything else before we close the meeting?
Regarding evaluations, in the future, I used to do this. I would also recommend that maybe you talk to Megan about how I'm doing. She may have a different perspective since she sees me on a daily basis.
Do we need a motion to close the meeting?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
You got a second? Thank you. All in favor? See you
Aye.
later.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks. See you.
See ya.